When you think of Animal Crossing, what comes to mind? The calming and relaxing vibes, the different faces you meet along the way, a canvas for psychological horror storytelling, the trafficking of Raymond? Animal Crossing means a lot of different things to so many different people. With every entry being so different from the last, it's amassed quite a diverse community in terms of tastes and background. And I think that's awesome. One of the most rewarding parts of doing AC videos is hearing other people share their experiences with the franchise. But that's neither here nor there. As time went on, Animal Crossing became a much more community-oriented game. And I mean in the real world. From Wild World introducing online to New Horizons becoming the only way to interact with friends in 2020, this game has brought so many people together. But easily one of the greatest additions in terms of sharing content with other players was the introduction of the Dream Suite. This was a feature first seen in Animal Crossing New Leaf. The Dream Suite is a cozy little shop run by Lunatea, which is an animal I just learned existed while researching her. Upon talking to Luna, she'll give you the option to either upload your town data for others to explore, or if you want to explore any other towns by yourself. This was such a great feature for players to explore different towns without needing to set up a playtime with other people. You can just enter towns on your own accord. And with a game that featured so many customization options like New Leaf, this was a fantastic addition. But some towns would go viral, at least in the Animal Crossing community. There were tons of really cool places to visit and things to see from many creative people. But one town in particular was quite infamous. A town that would cause unease and discomfort to those who visited. One that told a story through its environment and house decoration. This is, of course, Aika Village. Everyone's already said this, but it was very odd for a game as innocent and comforting as Animal Crossing to have such a prolific amount of horror-based towns. As a child who was curious yet reluctant of the horror genre, I used to eat this shit up back in the day. Never through actually visiting the towns myself, but just watching other people on YouTube play.
What the hell?
But this one in particular, Aika Village, was the horror town. Basically a pioneer for others to follow. Not to mention the fact that it was the most visited town in New Leaf, with over 315,000 visitors. This is a staple and an icon for true Animal Crossing enjoyers, such as myself. The original creator, who goes by Garaku, would also remake the town in New Horizons, but I just want to focus on the New Leaf town for now. It went through many changes over the years, which some people might not even know of. So, let me take you through this very infamous village, and discuss the story that lies within. Now, I can't access this village myself due to the New Leaf servers shutting down in 2024. However, many people have documented their visits to the town. I will be crediting all the footage in the description. Upon entering the village, the first two things you'll note is the weird fuzzy texture on the ground and a present that lays beside you. Inside of it contains the dolly item, which will be very important. Looking at the town layout is also quite fascinating. You wake up in the center of the village, and only have one bridge in the entire town. The river is positioned in such a way that there's really only one linear path you can take. Also, side note, but the villager up in that house is my boy Roscoe, who was one of my OG villagers. Absolute legend, that man. I miss him. Anyway, we begin to make our way from the plaza into the village, and we can see how gorgeous the town is. There are tons of perfect peach trees, but even more impressive are the carnations, flowers that are only obtainable on Mother's Day and Father's Day. Wonder if that has any symbolism. There's also a ton of statue fountains that seem to be placed in congruence with each other. But upon entering the first house, we are greeted with a scene of a birthday party. There are 3 mannequins, representing the titular Aika and her parents. An interesting thing here to note is that there is a room in the back of the house, but it's inaccessible with this dresser in the way. However, we can go upstairs where Aika's playroom resides. Here, we can see many toys, including the dolly we obtained earlier. More notably, there are 3 paintings in the room which depict Aika and her parents, Aika's mom, and a brown dog, presumably hers. There's nothing too creepy about these 2 rooms besides the music that was chosen, Hypno KK. It's a very strange, off-putting song that just has a weird, sinister aura. It's the epitome of eerie, and perfectly sets the tone for the village. If you encounter the girl who this house belongs to, she'll say to you, "This is inside my dreams." Worth noting that in earlier versions of the town, she'd say, "I love my mommy," a quote that's become pretty synonymous with the town. Making our way across the bridge, things are starting to look a tad bit different. Only a little though. Gone are all the perfect peach trees and carnations, and here's a very trashed maze-like pathway. This area is filled to the brim with sweets and dug up holes, and overall it's just an eyesore to look at. The statue fountains from earlier also make a return, however they're not equally aligned like before. In this area is also the town hall, which has the presumed mother as the town's flag. In front of said town flag is a megaphone, which will be important to remember. We eventually find a cemetery residing next to the town hall. If you have a shovel equipped, you'll find that there are dollies within the graves. In previous versions of the town, however, you would find dog houses buried instead. Another important detail to keep in mind. So we finally make our way to the second house. Unlike the first, this one is much more symbolic in nature. The first room is almost like a void, with LED exit signs and stools filled inside. It's a bit tricky to make your way around the room with just how many of these there are. The music playing in the background is KK Synth, a very captivating yet mysterious tune. Very perplexing in nature. And other than the main floor, there are 5 rooms in this house to explore. If we go upstairs, we will see a recreation of Genesis 3 from the Bible. This is when Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, a perfect and beautiful land representing God's finest work. Until the serpent convinces Adam and Eve to eat the forbidden fruit, getting themselves exiled from the Garden of Eden. This pretty much links back to the beginning of the town, which was very perfect and harmonized in nature, just like Eden. But of course, just like the story of the fall, the perfect world was not meant to last. This has some pretty interesting implications, which I will touch upon later. The room to the left shows a feminine statue overlooking a dolly in front of a great white shark with a bunch of roulette wheels spinning. The walls and floors also kind of look like clown vomit to me, and I'm gonna be honest, I really don't know what to make of this room. It's just pretty weird. The back room showcases a slew of toys facing away from us, but when we turn the camera around, we see 2 creepy sets of eyes plastered onto the wall, watching over the room. Easily one of the most infamous moments in the village. It really does kind of feel like you're being watched here. To the right of the house, we see many rows of owl clocks looking back and forth between 2 statues. These are Valiant statues, however both have different wings. To the right is the genuine statue, which has angel wings on its back, opposed to the forged statue on the left, which has demon wings instead. You can also see that the angel statue has heart balloons and roses next to it, while the demon statue has trash bags and shoes scattered around. Finally, in the basement, we have a very cheerful room, seemingly. These dollies are partaking in a giant feast, filled with many rich and delicious foods. Even some presents are around the table. However, when you make your way to the back, you'll notice that the red dolly has an axe behind her. What a devious little prankster she is. And if you encounter the Aika that this house belongs to, she'll tell you, your voice reaches no one. Okay, let's pause for a second and discuss what this could all mean. The second section of the village is very maze-like, which I believe could be metaphorical for Aika's mind, if that makes any sense. Very confusing, nonsensical, and even a little disturbing. As for the cemetery adjacent to the town hall, the megaphone and flag could be representative of Aika's mother calling for something, or someone. I think originally it was her dog from the earlier painting she was calling for, but given that the doghouses used to be buried in the cemetery, it's obvious that the dogs must have been murdered. Now with dollies residing in the graves instead, it could maybe represent other people being murdered that the mother is calling out for, but just like Aika said, your voice reaches no one, almost like she's taunting her. Now, let's take another look at the rooms we just found. They might seem random and unorganized at first, but there's a similar theme to all of them. Now, stick with me for a bit, because there's a lot of pieces to this. The upstairs room is the easiest one to decipher. The Garden of Eden represents what the town used to look like, and I believe that the parallel of the serpent could be the dolly. This world where Aika lives becomes corrupt after the dolly enters the picture. Continuing the biblical themes found within the house, I think the basement could also represent the Last Supper, the last time Jesus ate with his 12 disciples before being crucified. 12 disciples, 12 dolls. And remember how the one doll has an axe behind her? This could also be a parallel to Judas, the disciple who would end up betraying Jesus by the end. I don't think this has any literal parallels to Aika's story, but it's worth keeping in mind at least. The room to the right is pretty obvious about indecisiveness between good and evil, but the other 2 rooms are more hard to decipher. As for the room with the shark, yeah, I'm just gonna pass it on to you guys. I have no idea what to make of this. As for the back room, I believe that these 2 creepy sets of eyes are, hear me out, Aika's parents. This will make a little more sense when we enter the next house, but so far, we've been kinda seeing a theme of perfectionism. From the town to the Eden parallel, this is the world in which Aika lives. However, I believe this house kinda represents her mental state. From the indecisiveness between good and evil, the many maze-like pathways, this is a non-verbal study of Aika as a character. As for my little game theory about how the eyes are representing Aika's parents, I think this is to symbolize how watchful they are of her. There are other rooms we'll see that kind of encourage this belief, but for now, just remember, her parents are super watchful. In fact, that might actually be what the shark room represents. The feminine statue keeping a watchful eye on the dolly could be a parallel to Aika and her mother. I don't know. This certain level of perfection is expected from her, but this causes a great deal of anxiety for Aika. It's hard for her mind to navigate through life or deciding what's right or wrong. But this doll, she gives Aika a new life, a new purpose. There's a good chance that it's possessed by some demonic force that tempts her to go over the edge. Maybe it's a sense of catharsis or relief from Aika's day-to-day struggle with the expectations weighed upon from her parents. And maybe this doll is the serpent, the devil himself, set out to corrupt a beautiful and perfect world through this impressionable girl. Or maybe I'm going crazy. I don't know. Let's continue. Moving forward, we can see just how rotten things have literally gotten in the village. Dead bamboo shoots, spoiled turnips, trash and weeds as far as the eye can see. A deliberate far cry from the first section of the town. But within this area lies another house. This one looking a lot more shanty and rundown. Upon entering is the same exact dolly, but now with the axe in front of her. There's no music playing in this room. Only the creaking noises coming from a water bird, and the high-pitched noises from a theremin can be heard. Within this labyrinth of a library are some more interesting items. Easter eggs, candies, books, and a dolly with a black dress can be found in this room. There's also a new painting of Aika with her mom patting her on the head in the corner with the water bird. In the room to the right, there's a piano with 8 Easter eggs before it. Now, there's a lot that can be interpreted with this. Pianos are one of the most prestigious and renowned items in the entire world. For this reason, a lot of parents, particularly in Asian cultures, make their kids learn the instrument from an early age. A symbol of expectations. But what about the eggs? Well, they're placed in front of the piano, so it could represent walking on eggshells to meet expectations. But it could also be yet another biblical parallel. The number 8 is fairly prevalent in the Bible, but the meaning behind the number usually marks the beginning of something new. The 8th day is a symbol of a new week, and the eggs here could potentially be a sign of new life. Not sure how that fits in quite yet. The back room of the house is quite something. In the middle is a diary and a picture book enclosed in glass containers, with pages scattered all across the floor. There's also a music box in the corner of the room which plays the very familiar tune of Hypno KK. This house just keeps getting more and more interesting, huh? Well, we make our way upstairs and... what the f***? This room is laid out pretty normally, except all the furniture pieces have Aika's paintings from earlier. LED screens roll across the room with images of her family. The image of the dog is found on multiple seats in the room. But more notably, Aika's mom. She's inescapable in this room. Most of the furniture pieces here are imprinted with her image. And at the end of the room is the same dolly, staring at a static screen on a CRT. It's kind of like the film Poltergeist, where the ghosts communicate through the TV. Maybe that's how the dolly got possessed? Through TV ghosts? Who the hell knows? If you thought things were getting confusing here, then you're not ready for the basement. A dark, decrepit room surrounded with vintage furniture. A painting of Aika's mom can be seen here. But even more fascinating is the additional symbolism found in the center of the room. The dolly looking over the baby carriage, the caged bird with music sheets in front, and most obviously, the outlined body on the bed next to a telescope. There's a lot of profound imagery in this room, and it's not exactly clear what it could all mean, but I can try to break it down to the best of my abilities. For starters, the bird probably represents Aika. From the theme of expectations we've been seeing, I think this is the most powerful way of representing how she's felt all her life. Trapped within a cage, forced to sing the way her mother wants. There's a typewriter in the room too, which could symbolize how her mother would metaphorically write these songs for her. Again, in a metaphorical sense. What I think the rest of the room implies is a certain sense of life and death. Going back to the Easter eggs and TV from upstairs, this could be a very subtle way of teaching us how the dolly gained possession. Symbols of new life, the poltergeist scene from earlier, that's what I'm thinking over here. Maybe it's supposed to suggest that the dolly is haunted opposed to Aika hallucinating the dolly. Again, who the hell knows? But the outlined bed is where the death part comes in. It's pretty obvious that the outlined body is communicating that somebody had died in this part of the story. But what's the telescope all about? Well, it could just be another symbol of how Aika's mother was overprotective and watchful of her daughter. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the bed itself, despite how it's pointed in that direction. But as for the somebody who died in this part of the story, it's the mother. I think the dolly convinced Aika to take her mother's life, and what we see surrounding the room is how Aika's felt mistreated all of her life. This perfectionism, this walking on eggshells, she's grown tired of it, and she took matters into her own hands. When talking to the Aika this house belongs to, she says this scenery was always impure, which I think speaks to how she's always hated this perfectionist idealism. Continuing our waltz through this wasteland, we see even more incongruent fountains. Dead trees opposed to perfect peach trees, and weeds opposed to carnations. And by the end of this walkway, we see a house identical to the first one we discovered. Upon entering, we discover that the once bright, cheery room from the beginning of the town has been absolutely trashed. All sorts of garbage is scattered across the floor, and all the bright lights from earlier are shut off. Going upstairs is a pretty similar story. The dolly now holds an axe with her, the toys are facing the opposite direction, and the paintings have been crossed out. By the way, the teddy bear went from wearing a white and blue shirt to a black and red one. Very subtle, but kinda neat. An interesting detail on the family portrait is that Aika is the only one who's been scribbled out. Her mother's individual portrait was crossed out, which means she must have died. But what does that say about the father who doesn't have a portrait of his own? Could he still be out there somewhere? He's really out of the picture in this whole story, which I find to be curious. Maybe he's getting cigarettes. But the family portrait also implies that Aika is dead. Where could her fate lie? Well, at the back of the house, the previously inaccessible room can now be entered, revealing a very grim fate for the girl. Aika and the dolly are imprisoned, surrounded by mystic statues, watching the girl and her doll. Some people interpret this as her being institutionalized. The cages and faces watching her could imply that. However, I think this is Aika's personal hell. And the reason I think that is because of the village's beach. It's accessible through this part of the town. If you go upwards, you'll find a bed of 4-leaf clovers. Seems innocent until you realize in Japanese cultures, the number 4 is often associated with bad luck, or even death. The words 4 and death have very similar pronunciations in Japanese. So this could possibly imply that Aika is dead. But going down further on the beach doesn't just imply that she's dead. It basically confirms it. Eventually you will run across a pair of red shoes by the water. These red shoes belong to Aika. Now, if someone in Japan were to take their own life, the first thing they would do is neatly take off their shoes before doing so. Some people see it as a symbol of stepping into the afterlife, while others see it as a symbol of respect. Either way, what we can infer here is that Aika, whether by her own volition or convinced by the dolly, took her own life. What I believe is that in a moment of lucidity, she recognized the destruction she's caused. The dolly convinced her to commit such heinous actions, like murdering her family or destroying the village. Due to her not being able to live with this, she decides to drown herself. However, the afterlife she'll be stepping into is not one of bliss, but one of torment. Now she resides in a prison of her own making, only to be found with her favorite toy. As the story ends, the two sit here, watched over by guardian figures, for eternity. Aika herself says, this pleasant dream will immediately end, reflecting how the perfect, beautiful town from before is now a decrepit wasteland. Finally, if you find a wetsuit, you'll be able to swim over to the small piece of land. On it is a gravestone with some treats as an offering. Here you can find a skeleton, a time capsule, and that damn dolly. Aika is dead and resting in a hell of her own making. But that's just my take. Some people like to believe that the dolly is the one who killed Aika's friends and family, sort of like a Chucky Annabelle situation. In this theory, the dolly grew jealous of Aika spending more time with anybody else that wasn't her. So the doll decides to take matters into her own hands and tries to get Aika all to herself. Or maybe the dolly saw all the pressure and expectations put on Aika and thought she could help by murdering those who put her in that situation. Whatever the case may be, there will always be differing interpretations of this town's story. And that's really damn cool if you ask me. It honestly reminds me of analog horror in the sense that you're given a bunch of puzzle pieces of a narrative and are given the freedom to put them together. There's no right or wrong answers to any of this. It's all open for interpretation. But like I said, the town did have some changes over time. I'm not sure if every single thing's been documented, but luckily a player by the name of Northern Fusion Games went through this town one last time before the servers went off. A big change I noticed was in the basement of the second house. Gone were the dollies having a big feast, and now was a desert with 4 mega howloids and stacks of money scattered across. I'm not even going to attempt to make sense of any of this because, quite honestly, I have no idea what this has to do with anything. The Roulette Shark's room's been replaced with a bunch of dollies in black dresses having their own separate picnics. A mannequin dressed like Aika's at the center with a spoiled turnip in front of her. Again, I have no idea what any of this means. Maybe there's some Bible story that I missed that ties this all together. Now, the third house has some really weird changes. In the basement is no longer the mommy murder metaphor room, but is now Aika Cafe. Yeah, my thoughts exactly, Northern Fusion Games. I seriously doubt this has anything to do with anything and is most likely just the creator having some fun with the village. Perhaps it's a nod to the second most infamous horror town of all time, Hitokui Village. This one has a cafe inside of the first house, but as soon as you make it to the basement, oh, it's about cannibalism. It's kind of like that weird pilot of Bob's Burgers that I'm glad never actually became a show. The upstairs room also has some subtle changes, but relatively keeps the same idea. However, it contains a massive lore update. To the right of the room are the big Splatfest signs. The one on the left shows the portrait of Aika's mom, but the one on the right is a never-seen-before portrait of Aika's dad, with what appears to be a tombstone covering his face. So I guess he wasn't getting cigarettes after all, he's just f***ing dead. Murdered by Aika? I don't know, who knows? This is just such a weird addition. Finally, a left room was added to this house. Going inside shows a bunch of the Sanrio furniture and sea bass all around. You know, if anyone can tell me what this has to do with anything, I'll give you $6. There are some other subtle changes, like the gates that enclose Aika and her doll at the end, but that's really about it. Anyway. Holy shit, what a wild ride. Honestly, when writing this video, I forgot I was even technically talking about Animal Crossing. It's genuinely amazing how much planning went into this town. With New Horizons, there's a lot more you can do with switching the locations of buildings or terraforming the land, but in New Leaf, it's much more tricky. Everything about the town's layout to the very meticulous design of each room, there was so much that went into this village. To tell a unique story to players across the world. There weren't any cheap gore effects to convey what is happening either. It was all left to the player's imagination, which is something that the creator must have had a lot of. Garaku, you kick ass. This was genuinely one of the coolest experiences back when New Leaf still had its online. As for the horror media from my childhood I look back on, this is certainly one of my fonder memories. When it came to scary stories deriving from non-horror games, you had some really cool stuff, but you also had a lot of garbage. And I can definitely say that this falls into the former. To this day, one of the coolest projects ever done in Animal Crossing. But whatever, man, I'm gonna go play some Sonic Racing Crossworlds now.
My sitar skills are legendary.